This is it. The week that Penn State fans have been waiting for. I think Michigan fans have been waiting for it too. Penn State at Michigan on Saturday afternoon. The Big House at noon. National game. Fox, you name it. The hype is here. We're ready to talk about it. I'm Nate Bauer. He is Sean Fitz. This is the Blue White Illustrated Daily Edition. Sean.
Hello.
Oh, there's so much.
There is so much. It's such a big week, massive week for Penn State. This is not, I don't think you would call it Penn State's biggest game of the season, with Ohio State lurking in a couple of weeks, but probably the most vital, I would say. You know, this is the one that's going to set the tone for October. Northwestern aside, which was obviously October 1st and played in a slop. I mean, this 3 games is that's it for Penn State. That is the fulcrum of the season. We will see what happens over the next couple of weeks. Going to Ann Arbor has been very tricky for James Franklin. It's been, I mean, it's always tricky for I mean, that's a tremendous atmosphere, one of the great college football programs of all time. And then, you know, you take it on the road, you play Big Noon Saturday. That's there's a lot going against Penn State this week, but 2 top 10 teams, fairly evenly matched. We'll talk a little bit about both coming up, but it's an exciting weekend.
I kind of phrased it as it's like a class where 90% of your grade happens over 2 exams, and there's another, right? But for the most part, Penn State fans wanted to see the ship righted this year off of what happened, obviously, over the last 2 years for this program. But, you know, getting to 5-0 is fine. If you come out of the 2 games that you just mentioned, Michigan and Ohio State, with 0 for 2, you know, even at 10-2 for the season, I don't think anybody's going to be satisfied. And so obviously I don't want to spend any time talking about the completion of the season and looking at it on the whole, but you have to look at this game in that context of this is it. This is the game that Penn State fans want to see Penn State win. You're
channeling your inner Tom Bradley here with the expectations of the expectations.
The expectations,
you know, that kind of talk right now. But you're right. I mean, this is the litmus test. I mean, you don't want to throw. I mean, it's college football. You get 12 games a year, 13 games with a bowl game. You don't want to throw out any of those games, because this is why we follow the team all season long. This is why we are employed. This is why people follow our podcast. This is why people post on our message board.
Yeah.
But the 1-0 mentality will get you so far. You know, when you're playing Michigan, you know, when you're playing Ohio State, those are the top 2 in the Big Ten that you always look for, even when Michigan's down. That is one that you circle on the calendar as one of those potential whiteout games. Obviously, you know, Fox has different ideas for that, but no, this is a big one. And you're absolutely right. It's no matter the success of those other 9 or 10 games, these are the 2 that pop up every year, and they're just so huge.
Yep. No. And you know, certainly it's been interesting looking back at certainly the series that Penn State has had with Michigan, and then Ohio State as well. It's kind of interesting if you look at the nature of the games over the last 5 or 6 years. Penn State has played Ohio State more consistently, closely in that range, but has lost all of them, or all but one, dating back to 2016. Whereas with Michigan, some of the decisions in this series have been more lopsided in Michigan's favor, but also in Penn State's favor. And so you end up seeing these games that have been more lopsided, but the series itself, I believe, is even at 3-3 between these 2 teams over the last 6 years. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, go. I mean, it's been, you've run the gamut. I mean, you remember that game in 2018 out in Ann Arbor, 42-7. I mean, nothing was ever close. The last time out there, 2016, the year Penn State won a Big Ten title, they lost 49-10 out there.
Yep.
Penn State rebounded, beat them 42-13 the following year. But the last couple of matchups have all been close. Of course, last year, Michigan with the late touchdown won 21-17. It's been a series that's been all over the map, but it has come back down to sort of needling it and narrowing the focus and getting the score close. And I think that's the type of game that these coaches are comfortable playing. Not that neither wouldn't love a blowout, but both these coaches try to control it. James Franklin said it on Wednesday night after practice. Michigan is so good. They might not score 50 points, but they're so good at controlling it. And like we said against Northwestern, never putting it in doubt. And, you felt that way against Indiana last weekend, even though Indiana played them tight. Maryland has played them tight. The rest of their schedule has not been good. You can't, number one, fault them for that because these schedules are made so far out in advance, but you also can't take a ton away from that. So I think it's very interesting to look at this as a matchup of two teams that maybe get conservative in big games. That's been the label for both sides, and that's been, let's be honest, that's the label for 90% of college coaches. That's
of course
you. But you'll end up with a close game, I think, either way, and that's the way that it's trending over the last couple of matchups.
You mentioned practice, so before we get to Michigan in full, I think it's worth our time to discuss a little bit of what has happened in Penn State land over the last couple of days between James Franklin's Tuesday press conference, what we were able to see at practice on Wednesday night, and James Franklin's comments afterwards. From the offensive side of the ball, I kind of took the lead on that side. You were watching the defense. Offensively, there were some big returns, right, in terms of guys who were at minimum practicing. The chief among them being KeAndre Lambert-Smith was back with the receivers, running routes, participating. Okay. Can you go deeper than that when Penn State likes to run some of the tricks that they do in terms of player availability? No, can't guarantee that he will be available, but he looked okay on Wednesday night, and I think that is significant. Tyler Warren, who has been out he was out for the Northwestern game, also back with the tight ends practicing. That's important. Him not being available is kind of significant, I think, to what Penn State does there offensively, and particularly in that tight end room. Hunter Nourzad has missed each of the past 2 games. He missed Central Michigan, and that was kind of framed as being a precautionary measure that they wanted to, make sure that he was available for Northwestern by keeping him out for Central Michigan. And guess what? He ended up not playing it against Northwestern as well. So he was back in practice. He was working at center. So it could be something of note. And then last but not least, on the offensive side of the ball, Jaden Dotton, who played very briefly at the beginning of that Ohio game in week 2, but had not been seen since, either in practice or games. He's been at the games, been on the sidelines, but he hasn't been dressed for those 3 games following. So that's kind of a little bit of the rundown on the offensive side of the ball. We'll get to it in a little bit here. Ball security was a major theme. And, again, we always are at the ball security portion of practice. And so trying to cut through it and decipher how much more emphasis is on it this week as opposed to other weeks is just a stupid mission. It's a fool's errand. But no, it's one of those things that I think you couldn't help but notice on Wednesday night that they were talking about. How about the defensive side of the ball?
Defensive side of the ball, great to see Zariah Fisher back. If you follow my Twitter, I put up a clip up of Zariah running around, and he hurt his knee back in the spring. He's still out for the season. Nothing's changing there, but to see him where he's at in his recovery is just awesome, and it's a boost for next year. I know we're talking about Michigan this week, but you look at what Penn State brings back at DN next year. And especially with the emergence of Amin Vanover and Denai Dennis Sutton, you throw Zariah Fisher into that mix, and you're starting to feel pretty decent about what Penn State has coming back. Now he's got work to do to get where he needs to be. Again, we're not going to see him this year. James Franklin said after practice he's took another step, but nothing has changed in that nature. But Zariah Fisher, 36, great to see him back out there. Defensively, I mean, you just look at we tried to take away some sort of buzz from practice, and we said it against, I think it was Central Michigan. We said it that it seemed a little bit down after Auburn when it was buzzing out there. It seemed smoother last night, I think. I don't know that it was like overwhelmingly electric or anything like that, but you and I talked afterwards. Even James Franklin seemed a little bit more at ease than you would expect him to in a big game week. So not sure what to take out of that, but it seems relaxed. It seems positive from that manner. I'm not saying people are slacking here or anything like that. So I mean, from the defensive side of the ball, status quo, business as usual. Manny Diaz, it's been fun to watch him settle in. I know that's been a topic of conversation among the media this week is what does Manny Diaz bring? But watching him settle in, watching him get more comfortable, Central Pennsylvania is not Miami. That's quite obvious, but looking at him being more comfortable around his players, teaching the offense what they're doing on defense is going to help them on offense. Just little things like that. I think it's coming through. And as someone who was a little bit skeptical that egos of major college football head coaches could work together like that seamlessly after having really not worked together before, that is certainly a positive. And it's been fun to watch Manny Diaz defense. They've been flying around. These guys are, I don't want to say learning on the fly, but they're learning a lot and picking up a lot and putting that into action. It's resulted in forced turnovers. It's resulted in pressures and things like that, things that make it more fun to watch defense. And not that Brent Pry's defense, anything was wrong with that. But this one is certainly a little bit more of an entertaining brand of football. And, Penn State has established themselves as one of the better secondaries in the country because of that. And it's been fun to watch these guys ball hawk.
Yeah. Yeah, no question about it. They have been opportunistic as a defense. You mentioned, kind of the buzz and the demeanor. I mean, I think intentionally or deliberately poised is the way to put it, right? No shenanigans, nothing feisty last night. I don't think it's as you said, it's not as though it's slacking off or taking it easy. It's, hey, this is the goal at hand, and this is how Penn State intends to achieve it.
And then you bring PJ Mustipher out afterwards. That's the definition of poise and relax. Yeah. PJ's fantastic, man. I mean, I can't say enough good things about him. He's been sort of that stalwart that you just lean to, just the even flow guy. That's been really cool to watch him grow and getting him back for another year is just it's an amazing boost, especially in a game like this where they're gonna need him big time.
Yeah, and Sean Clifford was available to the media as well, I believe on Wednesday or Tuesday, over Zoom, and it brings back into this stark focus. Those are the types of guys who have been through it and have been around that Penn State is going to lean on in a game like this in terms of setting the standards for all of the other pieces who haven't, right? Like Katron Allen, Nick Singleton have not been, to the big house to play in a game, right? I mean, all of those many pieces, the King brothers, right, who are going to be a topic of conversation this week, just based on the fact that they're from Michigan. I'm not sure if you knew that, Sean.
First time.
Yeah, I know. Insight. No, so you just look around the roster and you see this gap, right, of guys who have been at Penn State for 5 and 6 years, and guys on the other end of the spectrum who just have not been around, who are going to have a new experience. James Franklin brought up, it was funny, I kind of lasered in on it, but he said he used the phrase "big boy ball" about the type of game that this is going to be. Do you want to, maybe touch on why that is? Like, it's not just lip service, right? You can have all of the cliches that you want about the Big Ten and the brand of football that the Big Ten represents, but with Michigan and particularly to Penn State and what Penn State wants to be, this is something else.
Michigan has established itself as a program like this. I mean, Jim Harbaugh's been running that offense since he was at Stanford, in the NFL, where you're trying to grind it out. And they've got a great running back, Blake Corum, who can bounce that outside and really make the most of it. But that is their identity. That is how they have won games. And that is how you can win a 4-point game and it feels like a 10-point game. That is where they're at. That's where they're comfortable playing. And Penn State's going to go in there and try and play that kind of game as well, which, is another one of those things probably working against Penn State this weekend, because they haven't been as successful running the ball in the last couple of seasons. So can they do that? I think they can. You look at Michigan up front on both sides, talented, of course. They've recruited very well. They recruit to their scheme. They recruit the way that they play the game, and that has benefited them, of course, with a college football playoff appearance last year. But they can be vulnerable. If Penn State gets after them, they have the ability to disrupt it and really set them behind. Now, things have to fall into place and things have to work very well. We mentioned PJ Mustafer. He's got to play one of his better games this week. Those defensive ends that we talk about, their pass rush, have to play the run. But yeah, you've got to be physical. If you're a Penn State fan, you've been itching for this type of game. You just need to see how this type of team can respond. And, with all due respect to Auburn, Purdue, any of the games that the tougher games on Penn State's schedule early in the season, which will help Penn State into figuring out what type of team they are. That's not this type of game. And I think that's really where Penn State has to grow. Penn State has to focus on going after these guys up front and trying to overwhelm them. Not sure they're going to do it, but trying to overwhelm them on both sides of that line of scrimmage. Very simple things. You mentioned lip service earlier, cliches about the Big Ten, but Penn State's going to have to play a Big Ten game, Big Ten style game at some point.
Yeah, no, it's funny though, because it's a combination of both, right? That's not, Penn State doesn't at its core want to be Michigan, right? They don't. They want to be explosive. I don't know that all of the horses are available to be that necessarily on this team this year for Penn State.
The wide receiver, you can say it.
Yeah, they don't have the receivers for it, and they might not have the quarterback for it. Just
also true,
honestly, in terms of connecting on the deep shots that Penn State wants to connect on, all of the numbers, the data backs it up. T. Frank has talked about it endlessly, and he's right. It's not there. In fact, if you look at Penn State's receiving chart right now, it is very similar or reminiscent of the rushing chart last year, in that you look at the long receptions, it's a broken play for Brenton Strange, and that's about it, right? Parker Washington, 35 yards. Mitch Tinsley, 32 yards. I'm doing it from memory right now, but it's just they have not had that field stretching explosiveness that Penn State wants to have. And so because of that, you brought in this dynamic of Nick Singleton, who can go and has gone 70 a couple of times, 55. But you just don't have that receiving element. And so whether Penn State wants to stretch these guys out and beat them down the field and play their own brand of football or not, they're still going to have to move to the middle in meeting Michigan where Michigan's at in terms of dictating the terms of the game and having that type of presence.
If I can dumb it down even more, I think what you're trying to say here,
it can't be dumber than me. Come on, buddy.
Well, I'm saying it for us, not for the people listening. I'm saying it for us to dumb it down as much as possible. Penn State's offense wants to be Ohio State's offense. They want to be that explosive, can score from anywhere on the field. Michigan's offense wants to be Michigan's offense. And that's great. I mean, it works. It certainly has worked for them last year and to the start of this season. And I think Michigan's fine being Michigan's offense. It's just Penn State wants to be that explosive offense. They're going to have to figure out how to use be the mean of those two, I guess, because I don't think they're at either spot right now. So I think that's the biggest thing to take away from it is Michigan is very good at what they do, and they're content with being Michigan's offense, and that's great. But Penn State wants to be that explosive offense, but I don't know that you can play that game because I don't know that you've got the quarterback and the receivers to do so this weekend.
Yep. Either way, whether Penn State's able to do that or not, you, me, and Greg Pickle will be there, and maybe some other Penn State fans will as well, which is why we're going to shout out our sponsor, Tixman Gym, right now. Have you been looking for a reliable source of Penn State football tickets? Jim at TixmanGym.com, formerly at PSUTixman.com, has been running his ticket exchange in Wilmington, Delaware for over 25 years. Every buyer is handled with courtesy, respect, and every ticket purchase is guaranteed. Proceeds are used to fund the Penn State AA Chapter Scholarship Fund and the PSU Levi Lamb Fund for athletic scholarships. Couple of big games coming up, obviously, for Penn State. He actually does have Michigan tickets, so worth taking a look at that road venue. But obviously, Penn State, Ohio State on the backside of this game. And before that, Minnesota, the homecoming whiteout game. So if you are interested in tickets, finding tickets for that through a reliable source of getting tickets, go to www.tixmangym.com or email Jim directly at tixmangym@gmail.com. Or you can also call him at 302-521-8380 if that's the easier way to get in touch. That number again is 302-521-8380. So Penn State at Michigan. What about Michigan? Right? This it has been the question of the week. I have spent some time watching Michigan. You have spent some time watching Michigan. You know, there are an endless number of ways to take this, but what do you make of them given the schedule that they've played, the opponents that they've played, and kind of how those games have fallen out so far this season for them?
I think the trap to fall into is you look at the non-conference schedule, which was among the worst we've ever seen. And that's, as again, no fault of Michigan. They've scheduled some of the, I mean, they're not premier teams or anything like that, but they schedule these in advance. Then you play Maryland tight, you play Indiana tight. Iowa obviously is Iowa. So that's going to be low scoring on one side at least. But I think the trap to fall into is you say, are they good? I do think they're good. I think that this is a good football team. It's a top 5 football team. We've changed sort of our outlook on college football to micro analyze every little thing and pick apart. And that's the trap that you can fall into, is you can say, well, they haven't been overly impressive against Big Ten. Indiana played them tight for a half, all that kind of stuff. It makes you want to believe that Michigan is probably not as good as they are. And they've got pieces here. They're kind of like Penn State. They've got pieces, elements of a very good team, just not consistently across the board what you would want. I don't think they're as good as last year's playoff team.
Yeah.
A big part of that, they don't have the pass rush that they had last year. Obviously 2 first round, or I think Ojabo was early second round or something like that. Phenomenal pass rushers. You lose those guys, you're going to have an issue no matter who you are. You're not stacking those guys at that position. But on this offense, 43 points a game, little bit misleading because of that non-conference schedule, but you've still got JJ McCarthy, who has been efficient. I don't think he's been overwhelming, but he has been efficient. He's been accurate. And that's what you're asking a sophomore to do. Was nation's best completion percentage. I had it, but he's been pretty solid back there, and he's a talented kid. He's a guy that's been built for this. He was a prospect at the younger part of his high school career before he transferred and then ended up at Michigan. So he's a very good player. Blake Corum is the guy that's going to stir the drink, so to speak. The Michigan running game has been good. Corum has been one of those guys, maybe a little bit like Nick Singleton, in the fact that probably his stats show more of the explosive, get to the ball to the outside, break off a 27-yard run, and and things like that. Running between the tackles has been a little bit tougher sledding, but he's great back. He's worked his way into it. St. Francis, played at St. Francis. I think he started at Pilati before that, but has worked his way into an NFL prospect and done a phenomenal job. Outside, Ronnie Bell is a guy that I think everybody remembers from Penn State a couple of years ago. Cornelius Johnson, a guy that I really like coming out of high school. Tight ends, very interesting. Eric All has missed the last 3 games. I believe he caught the game-winning touchdown last year against Penn State. He's missed the last 3 games, but Luke Schoonmaker has really stepped up. He's got 20 catches in the last 3 games, 3 touchdowns. He's been quite good. So that offense has weapons. I don't know that the receivers on either side are overwhelming to the point that they can, put up scores quickly. But this is a talented football team. Yeah,
it's funny that you mentioned the receivers. I think certainly if you're looking at Penn State's strength defensively, that's an area of the field that I think that Penn State would probably should feel good about, should come away feeling as though they're at least evenly matched with what Michigan brings to the table. What are in your mind, you're drawing this up, how does Penn State beat Michigan on Saturday?
Don Brown would have a word. You look at what Penn State is, they've done so many different things defensively, but they've got the corners to hang with those receivers. Like I said, Ronnie Bell, very, very good. They've got some other guys. The drop off is noticeable after those first two receivers in terms of production, but Penn State's corners, I think, can hang with them. So does that mean Manny Diaz just throws numbers at the offensive line? That's really what I would do. I think the offensive line is solid. It's good, solid to good, but also vulnerable at spots. You can get to the quarterback. You can put pressure, and any team, even if you have a good offensive line, is going to struggle with numbers. So I think that's something that we see Manny Diaz try to exploit. Just try and get after them with numbers and make the matchups work to your favor.
Yeah, and stop Blake Corum, right? It's twofold with him. Penn State has fallen into a I'm not going to say a rhythm, but they'll let you run for 5 yards at a time. They can live with that. They have shown that they can live with that. And not as though they don't want Curtis Jacobs and Tyler Elsdon to hit their gap and play aggressive. James Franklin was talking about it last night. They want all of that, but they also don't want to make backbreaking mistakes. And so what Penn State has done an excellent job, I cannot hammer it home enough this season, is they have not got gutted for home runs. That's on the back end. That's with certainly with passing touchdowns, but it's also with rushing touchdowns for the most part. And what I noticed in watching Blake Corum and Michigan is that's what he does. That's what he does is he breaks off long ones that change the dynamic of the game, how the game is played, and the position from which Michigan can operate. James Franklin talked about it all week this week, that look at, don't just look at the stats with Michigan, because those tell a sexy tale, right? They catch your eye, and there's good reason for that. But so much of how those have played out this season for them have been based on the fact that they've been able to produce leads early in games and then play with, again, dictating the terms of the game and how they want the game to go.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's their style. That's the way that they've been successful for so long. A couple of other things to add. Donovan Edwards, the backup running back, insanely talented kid, also a threat to catch the ball out of the backfield. Roman Wilson, third wide receiver, also very good. And the one thing that I keep going back to with Corum, we talk about bouncing it outside and all that kind of stuff. The cutback lane has been sort of an Achilles heel in terms of Penn State's ability to stop the run. And that's where runs turn from 2 yards into 7 yards, 8 yards, things like that. Yep. Backside pursuit, incredibly important against Blake Corum because he's such a good back, great vision, can find it. He's little, but he's strong. He's got a ton of things working for him. And that's going to be one of those things where it's the difference between 2nd and 8 and 2nd and 3, 2nd and 2. And James Franklin was talking last night about staying on schedule. And part of that is keeping the other guy from being on schedule. And you mentioned, yes, they will get, I don't want to say gash, but they will give up 5-yard runs. They will give up those things. They're not giving up the big play, but you also want to sort of tighten up a little bit and take just shaving yards off of run, sort of that. We talk about hidden yardage in special teams. You've got that in defense as well, where a running back can be so effective falling forward for an extra 2 or 3 yards, and it changes the dynamic of how you call the next play. That's what we're talking about with Penn State's defenses, is to wrap up, to not let him get to the backside, because when he gets to the backside, that's when it becomes 2nd and 1.
Yep. We will. Do you have anything more on Michigan that you want to address before? I don't necessarily want to. I mean, we're going to make our picks here, but I do want to talk very quickly about the line and whether or not you were interested in where it's been. Like, does that? I don't know. It seems like an interesting line. It just seems like an interesting conversation point because between the over under at 52 and then the line itself at 7, I'm just curious where you fall on that.
Just watching Jim Harbaugh and James Franklin, 52 seems like a lot in those games. You mentioned how these things sort of come together, and following wins. I love Winsipedia, by the way. You just scroll over it, but last 2 games, 21-17, 27-17. Yeah, I don't want to say well under, but pretty decently from a gambling perspective. So I think the under is the play in this game. Weather shouldn't be a factor, but it's October in the Big Ten. So the under is what screams out to me, which means we're probably going to be in for like a 43-41 game or something like that.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
completely wrong on this stuff sometimes. But that's the thing that jumped out to me. That's a lot of points for a Penn State Michigan matchup, I would say.
Yeah, we'll see.
I see models that have it well over. So
yeah, right. What do you have? How do you see this game going? What's your pick?
Well, I did want to talk a little defense. I know you gotta roll here, but Mozzie Smith, Mike Morris, the pass rusher is something to be aware of. I'm still, from a Penn State perspective, still the same spots worry me. Right tackle with Caden Wallace. I think they're going to throw a ton at Caden Wallace, and that's going to be something they're going to have to address with an extra tight end, a running back, something like that, because these guys can get to the passer. Iyabi Anoma, which is, I'm saying his old name because that's what Penn State fans will recognize him from St. Francis. Of course, went to Alabama. He's a talented guy that probably is still a little bit rough around the edges. DJ Turner, Mike Sandra still, Junior Colson is a guy that I loved out of high school. And I mean, you just look at, from a Penn State fan perspective, following recruiting, there's a ton of familiar names out here. So you'll be just like, oh, I know that guy, Makari Page, RJ Moten from New Jersey. There's just a bunch of those guys. It's a Michigan. This Michigan team is in tune with its identity on both sides of the ball. That's basically, it's a really good compliment that I can give because it's been such a successful program. But I did just want to touch on the defense prediction. I've got Michigan winning 24-17. Very, very tough to go on the road. Those games in the latter part of the last decade were not close. Penn State did win the last time they were out there, but that was the COVID year, I believe. So yeah, a couple of things at play there. But playing on the road against a really good team in Michigan, I have Penn State playing a close game, getting after Michigan, but coming up a little bit short.
Yeah, and I have the same. We're going to make all Penn State fans upset with us today.
Yeah, they like Ryan and Greg this week for some reason. So
I'm nice. 27-24. I have Michigan winning. Do I think that this is a game that Penn State can win? Definitely. There is not this broad-based evidence that it's like an impossible task to complete for them. It's just a little, to me, it feels like a game where a little bit of unpredictability comes in the sense of does Nick Singleton's chunk runs, do they go for touchdowns? Like, can he, foot race guys the way that he did at Auburn and get into the end zone? Can Mitchell Tinsley turn, again, like I stressed earlier, that 30-yard reception into a touchdown? I don't know.
They got to make the 30-yard reception first. I mean,
totally
the element of what Jahan was so good at, and just snatching the big play from absolutely nothing, and oftentimes a bad throw. And we haven't seen that from them. And that to me is, quarterback, right tackle, wide receiver on offense. You still got questions there. I think what you're trying to say, Michigan is not overwhelming in the matchups in any area. You don't look at one spot and say Michigan is so much better than Penn State in this area. You don't look at the opposite and say Penn State is so much better than Michigan in this area, which is why we're both predicting a close game. Yeah. That goes back to, which sort of which guy on that field can go out and make the big play and turn it into 6, and that's where I think we both have our concerns. For Penn State, certainly should be an interesting game. Sean Clifford obviously is going to be a focal point, how the offensive line holds up, but then on the other side of the ball, JJ McCarthy, Blake Corum, that'll be something that
Penn State fans are it's not just them. It's how does Penn State's defensive line stack up against that offensive line, right? I mean, you could see the way that it's going to trend in that so much of opening the door to those pieces, those explosive pieces that we talked about, having success or not, is going to be one at the point of it. I mean, I hate saying that's such a cliche, but right, like it just will. These are the types of games where you have to be able to hang at that level to get to that point where it's an opportunity in the first place.
Absolutely. So. And rattle the younger quarterback. Sean Clifford has seen this thing before, and he hasn't always played well in this situation, but a young quarterback playing in, I don't want to say his first big start, but this is, as essentially a full-time starter. McCarthy is playing a really big game as a starter for the first time. So get after him, throw numbers at them, throw waves at them if you can. Keep McCarthy in front of you because he can run. He will be able to rip off chunks, and it will be mega frustrating for this defense if they can't keep one of those guys in the pocket in front of him. I'm not saying a spy. I don't think he's a guy that you spy, but I think he's a guy that you have to keep in front. It's just that's where you've got to take those experiences, as Franklin said last night about, I think he was talking about Mustipher, but he kind of took it to the entire team. Those guys that have that experience, that have played in this situation before, that if they do their job, it opens up for those younger guys to try and make the impact and make that transition to playing in the big game much easier for them.
Yep. All right. Well, that's it from us. Either way, it's going to be interesting. We're certainly excited to go out and cover this game. Sean, we will be back with Greg on Saturday after the game. Looking forward to it, and we will talk soon.
All right. Sounds good. Don't forget to like our video. The dollar deal, I know it sounds redundant, but it is running out. We'll be done at the end of next week. So check us out. We've got a ton of stuff from recruiting for next weekend for the whiteout as well. But we always enjoy our trips to Ann Arbor, and it'll be a good one.